So our seventh principle states that we will respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. But what does that mean in our technology-driven 21st century? How do we honor this true World Wide Web rather than the one that exists only in the ether? I think that my career as a general surgeon would be a good analogy for how I initially approached my environmental responsibilities. When I removed a diseased appendix or gallbladder, I was contributing to the health of that patient. I never once, however, considered myself part of that patient. I approached my actions with respect to the environment in a similar mindset. I recycled my papers, cans, and glass. I drove a fuel-efficient car. I put solar panels on my roof. While these efforts contributed to the health of the planet, I was acting as if I were independent of the web, assisting it rather than being in it. My perspective began to change about 10 years ago when I watched my buddy, Pocky the Wonder Dog, have a dream. She had rapid eye motion sleep. She vocalized. Her paws were going. I realized that somehow she was constructing a narrative, and she was in it. I didn't understand then, and I still don't now. But somehow she had a sense of self. She was, at some level, self-aware. Now, if Pocky had a sense of self, it only made sense that other animals had a sense of self. And if pigs and cows had senses of self, a bacon cheeseburger started to sound more like murder than like dinner. And so that's when I became a vegetarian. I did continue to eat eggs, but only from happy chickens. I had friends who had chickens in their backyard. I didn't know anybody with a backyard dairy cow, but I did buy milk products that were advertised as coming from pasture-raised animals. My self-satisfaction was short-lived, however, because though I might be a vegetarian, Pocky wasn't. I knew I couldn't meet her digestive and nutritional needs with a vegetarian diet. For Pocky to live, other animals had to die. I finally settled this conundrum in the only way I knew how at that time. I ignored it. Turns out, though, I couldn't really ignore it. I was suddenly acutely aware of how often I unintentionally caused harm to others. Take shoes as an example. I decided to avoid buying leather shoes because they were, well, leather. That said, I still needed to be shod. So if not leather, then what? I did briefly consider vegan leather, but that's a petroleum product, so that was out. Synthetic fabrics from recycled plastics were a good option from an environmental perspective, but they really made my feet sweat. And cloth, like the old Keds, was a potential option for home, but they were not going to make the professional statement I wanted at work. So one day I mentioned my quandary to my then assistant, Jason. Don't worry about it, he responded. No matter what you choose, they're probably made by slave children in China. So, thanks a lot, Jason. I know he meant his remark as a joke, but I took it to heart. Choosing a shoe is about more than choosing the material. Who made it and how it was made was also an issue. I felt defeated trying to address all those issues, and that's just talking about a shoe. So I finally dealt with the problem the same way I dealt with feeding Pocky. I ignored it. For years, I continued in this uncomfortable place, a vegetarian who fed her dog lamb-based food, a product consumer overwhelmed by all the potential missteps in any purchase. And, like the good Catholic girl that I was raised to be, I felt guilty no matter what I did. When it came to the interdependent web of existence, I was still more like an outsider looking in. Then I had the good fortune to come across Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. In the chapter entitled The Honorable Harvest, she directly addresses this conundrum. Quote, "Reciprocity helps resolve the moral tension of taking a life by giving in return something of value that sustains the ones who sustain us." End quote. In one sentence, she acknowledges that the only way for us to live is for someone else to die. Kimmerer then puts the person solidly into the interdependent web. I am no longer outside taking. Rather, as a part of the web, I'm receiving a gift. And as we all learned in childhood, you must give thanks to the gift giver. Now the question is, how do I give thanks? I know I can't go to the farm and personally thank the lamb that's going to become Pocky's kibble. Nor can I give an armload of hay to the cow that will one day become part of my shoes. I think the first step in giving thanks is to sit with the discomfort caused by taking a life to sustain your life or the life of someone you love. And when I was writing those words, I remembered Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. I think everybody here is old enough to remember that. Remember the chase scenes? And who did you root for? The terrified bunny that was running for its life to escape, or the hawk that was hunting for food to bring home to its nestlings? If the rabbit escapes, the hawk has wasted precious energy in a futile hunt. And if the hawk's a poor enough hunter, its offspring will die. On the other hand, if the hawk succeeds, the bunny's dead. And if the rabbit had young in its burrow, they too will now die. I remember the emotional roller coaster of watching these chases, the elation of seeing the rabbit escape, diving into the safety of its burrow, reuniting with its offspring. But then I'd feel so defeated watching the hawk return to its nest without food for its young. Conversely, if the hawk had a successful hunt, my sympathies were with the rabbit, even as I thrilled watching at the hawk feed its young. Life for one meant death for the other. And that's not a very comfortable thought, is it? If death, however, is part of the web of life, then feeling guilty about sustaining life is pointless. Rather, by being aware of the gift that I received, I become more aware of my place in the interdependent web of existence and of my responsibility to it. To thank the lamb who became part of Pocky's kibble, I had a responsibility to care for Pocky, to keep her healthy, to let her know she was loved. To thank the cow whose hide became my shoes, I needed to be sure the shoes were well made, the people who made them were well treated, and then to properly care for them so I could get maximum use out of them. Our seventh principle, however, calls us to respect the interdependent web of all existence, not just of life. And how do I do that? How do I respect a rock simply because it's a rock and not because I can use it as a stepping stone to cross a stream? And how do I respect the air simply because it's the air and not because I need it to live? How do I respect water not because I need clean water to drink, but because it's water? And one approach would be to accept pantheism, the belief that everything is God. In most, if not all religions, however, God is supreme over us. We obey and worship our God. And the idea of worshiping a rock or air or water just doesn't sit well with me. And I have no idea how I would obey said rock, air, or water. In Matthew Fox's original blessing, I learned of panentheism, the belief that God or the divine is in everything. Now think about that for a moment. The divine is in everything. The rock isn't divine, but the divine lives in it. The air isn't divine, but the divine floats in it. And the water isn't divine, but the divine swims in it. Everything houses the divine. Panentheism turns the world into a cathedral, like Notre Dame. When I visited Notre Dame, I didn't worship it as if it were a god. Rather, I entered and acted with respect because it was a house of God, a house of the divine. As a panentheist, I would treat the mountains around us, the Bridgers, the Absorcas, the Crazies, the Gallatins, with respect and care. Not because I love hiking and camping and mountain biking and skiing, but because they house the divine. How would our world be different if we were all panentheists? For example, what if every dog owner in Bozeman was a panentheist? Would our trails be cleaner because they believe the trails house the divine? Our seventh principle, the respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, has changed my perception of my place in the world. I no longer feel guilty for taking. I feel grateful for receiving. I remain a vegetarian, but I honor all those lambs in Pocky's kibble by loving and caring for her until her death at age 17. I drive my little Honda Insight, nicknamed the gerbil, and I have solar panels on my roof because I respect the air. I've been landscaping recently with drought-resistant plants out of respect for the water and for our miraculous aquifers. If I did these things solely because I wanted to preserve clean air for me to breathe or clean water for me to drink, it'd be too easy to give up. I mean, I'm what, one of 8 billion people? How could my efforts make a difference? When I choose, however, to act out of respect for all beings, animate or inanimate, corporeal or incorporeal, ideas of success and failure drop away. I'm reminded of a Buddhist story which I'll paraphrase. One day a brave warrior was riding on his war horse, both of them resplendent in their armor, when he came across a small bird lying on its back, little legs in the air. "Are you okay?" he asked the bird. "Oh yes," replied the bird. "I'm lying like this because I've heard the sky is falling down." The warrior roared with laughter. He was like, "Do you really think you're going to hold up the sky by yourself with those spindly little legs? Don't be ridiculous." And the bird was unperturbed. "We each do what we can," he responded. And so I encourage you to be as wise as this little bird. Don't be discouraged from acting because you believe that whatever you do will be too little to matter. Instead, each of us need to act out of respect for this crazy, troubled, miraculous, and yes, divine, interdependent web in which all of us live.